we are again. I do just want to take a minute to, I don't know, acknowledge, hold space for the fact that the world feels heavy to me right now. And the things that we're gonna, largely what we're gonna spend our time discussing today, in some ways also feels heavy. And so I guess I just want to say, you know, I feel like it's easy to forget that we've hopefully sort of survived. If we're all here, we've survived it, I guess, you know, a pandemic for the last couple of years. I was in a conversation on Friday, and we were talking about leadership in the field of family and child studies and some kind of unrelated things, but thank you for your note, Madison. But the level of like exhaustion, you know, physical, emotional, mental exhaustion that I think many of us are experiencing or have experienced. And then I was personally in a place where I was starting to feel optimistic and hopeful that we were kind of coming out on the other side. And now we're, you know, looking at other things, conflict on kind of the global level that, you know, kind of, again, just shaky ground, I guess. I don't know. But I say all that just to say that I think first and foremost, our responsibility is to take care of ourselves and then to take care of others in the best way that we can. And so we're going to spend our time today talking about LGBTQ plus community. There are a couple of just kind of highlights that I want to hit, and then you'll spend the bulk of your time in breakout rooms looking at trends and current events, current issues that relate to LGBTQIA families and individuals. And, you know, I'll say I had this PowerPoint kind of finalized a couple of weeks ago even, and I went back in Sunday night and added a news article from the goings on in Texas just last week. If you're aware of that, if you're not, you'll become aware of it by the end of our class. But my point is just that, you know, these issues of diversity, acceptance, inclusion, access, and then just in a certain level, I think like basic humanity, you know, these things are happening all the time in front of us. And so our responsibility to take care of ourselves, then we extend that to other people and just try to be good humans. And so that is why we're having these conversations, to kind of shine light on the issues, and then, you know, do our best work to move forward in doing the next right thing. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to acknowledge all of that, because for me, it's easy to just like keep my head down and you know, live my day-to-day life from the comfort of my home, and sort of feels trivial sometimes, you know, when we look at what's happening on the bigger playing field. Anyhow, so with all of that, I will start sharing my screen. I guess I will also remind you, because I just saw the reflections. If you haven't already submitted those, they're due by midnight tonight. So please make sure that you get those in. And then the only other responsibility that you will have for this week is to complete your midterm. In an effort to make that more accessible, I did extend the time from 1 hour to 2 hours from the first exam. So you will have 2 hours to take the midterm, due by close of the day on Thursday. And it is open book, open notes. The only thing you cannot do is use another person to help you. But hopefully it's really honed in on what we've talked about these last 3 weeks, I guess, and then some major concepts from the beginning of the semester. But hopefully folks will do well, and given a little more time, maybe you'll be able to do your digging and find the right answers. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So again, the main thing we're going to do today is I want to tease apart the distinction between sexual orientation and gender identity. And then we're just going to kind of hit some of these highlights, but the majority of the terminology, definitions, all of those things you can just get from your text. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with that today. But I do want to start with LGBTQIA. That sounds like alphabet soup. And what those letters are sort of an acronym for: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Q can be for queer, folks who identify as queer, or questioning. So people who have not solidified their gender identity, sexual orientation, might identify as questioning. Intersex individuals. And then the A is for asexual or allies. So allies are people who do not identify as any of the things that you see on this list, but instead identify as being an advocate and ally for folks in the LGBTQI community. So the distinction between sexual orientation and gender identity is important. And when we define sexual orientation, what that is an enduring emotional, cognitive, and sexual attraction, or in the case of asexual individuals, a non-attraction. So folks who are asexual would say that they, are not attracted to other individuals regardless of the other person's sexual orientation or gender identity. And then I believe, by and large, heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, lesbian, and gay, those are all pretty straightforward in terms of our societal definition of those terms. Would anyone be willing to unmute and tell me what is meant by pansexual? So that's the only one that I feel like I want to really talk about.
From my understanding, I think pansexual is like they don't have a specific for like their sexual or like gender orientation. They like literally just don't care.
So they are attracted to other individuals without regard for the other person's gender identity or how it relates to their own, right? So it's not like I identify as a female and I'm attracted to females. It's I identify as whatever and I'm attracted to other people based on their personality, their interactions, but it's less about gender identity and sexual orientation. Correct. And then, so gender identity, distinct from sexual orientation, right? Sexual orientation is how we find ourselves in attraction to others. And gender identity then is how we identify, or what is our concept of ourself as male, female, and that's that duality, that's standard, consistent in our society, or a blend of both, because as we've talked about in this course already, gender, is conceptualized not so much in male and female terms as a spectrum, right? So somewhere along that spectrum, folks might identify as being not one or the other, but somewhere in between. Any questions or comments on the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity?
I had a question. Do you know what the demographic is for the different sexualities, or no? Like the percentage?
I do not, and I don't recall that being part of the chapter. Although I will say that there's a fair amount of statistics in this textbook, but that one does not ring a bell to me.
All right, thank you. I'll do my own research. I'll just
I apologize that and I'm sure that's a moving target, kind of like any data. I would imagine it changes.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So lots of times in this class, we have kind of related our understanding of relationships or, you know, how we understand and define marriage, those type of things, to theoretical frameworks. Just want to kind of make a note that researchers have tried that with sexual orientation diversity, have tried to understand, you know, what is the theoretical underpinning for this diversity that we see in terms of human sexual orientation. And they're not able to pinpoint a single theory that can explain what we observe in terms of the spectrum and the diversity. They point to a number of factors that include genetics, hormones, gender role behavior. So if you think back to that role theory that we discussed, maybe last time or the call before that, when we're thinking about how we might select a partner that is a model after, you know, our own father or our own mother, that's a factor here as well. Sometimes birth order can be marked as a factor. And then childhood sexual abuse or other ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, have also been pinpointed as being impactful on a person's sexual orientation. But generally speaking, there is not a single theory that can explain how this comes to be within a person. And so, you know, the cause of it is kind of a question. And then also, I just want to note that this is not a stagnant kind of a one and done. For many people, this is a very dynamic, fluid experience, and sexual orientation may change throughout the course of their life. And so again, you know, we might see genetics, hormones, behavior, those type of things at play in terms of what creates changes in someone's sexual orientation. Thoughts or questions on that? All right, so the next point on negativity and phobias is going to kind of lead us into our breakout conversations. So generally speaking, we live in a society that is marked by this notion of heterosexism. That's the institutional and societal reinforcement of heterosexuality as the norm, right? And I would say that even though we've seen significant shifts in the past decade or so towards awareness, inclusion, advocacy, we still live in a society marked by heterosexism because we see things like prejudice, discrimination, homonegativity, homophobia. And then there are also biphobia and transphobia, you know, as kind of related ideas, but pretty much the effects of these biases and discriminations are the same across the board. We see, you know, hate crimes, people who identify as LGBTQ plus, excuse me, have concerns, fears, they experience grief as a result of their identity and orientation. And then we might also see people trying to fit inside a box that doesn't fit them, if you will. You know, they're restricting themselves in terms of intimacy and self-expression to align with that societal norm of heterosexism. We also see stigmatization of sexual behaviors. And then in some instances, school shootings have been related to hate crimes around this type of negativity and phobia. There's been, I'll just kind of point you to read more about this allied development model, but there's been some work done in the K-12 world to push for, you know, eliminating or minimizing prejudice and discrimination, and to also provide folks in the LGBTQ community framework for how to respond to this negativity and phobia. But I think, as you'll see in your breakout discussions, there's still work to be done. Sorry, I'm moving things around. And then two kind of big ideas that I'll just, again, I'm going to refer you to your text for the sake of time to look into these a little bit further, are the notion of coming out in one's family and in society, you know, in the broader sense, kind of what that means, what are the implications of that, what are people's concerns about that, risks and benefits, that type of thing. And then I also want you to be aware of parenting issues related to individuals in the LGBTQ community. So there are a couple of pages in the text related to both of those ideas. Just make sure that you've read that and are kind of clear on what's being discussed in terms of coming out and parenting issues. And then with that, I'm going to spend a minute or two creating, we're going to have 8 breakout rooms because there are 8 slides on the course page. If you'll open the Google Doc that's called group work. Oh my God, it's not even here. Jeez. Okay, give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. So what we're going to be doing is, let me stop my share so you don't see all this craziness. There's a slide at the beginning of this slideshow with guidance on what you'll be doing in your breakout groups, but you need a spokesperson, and then you're going to be doing some research on current events. Each group has its own current event to describe, so summarize what the event is, like what's happened in the news, relate it to our course content, specifically from this chapter, but there may be other ideas as well that you can relate to. And then tell me, what is your group's stance on the issue? So sorry, I really have a hard time talking and working. If you are unified in your stance, you can share that. And if you have, and it's okay to have differences of opinion, you know, I want this to be a safe space for healthy dialogue. So if there are differences of opinion, share those. And what you'll do is add to this slideshow that I am working to put on here. I do apologize. Right, so if, oh my God, I just added it to the wrong section of the page. We are in 101. So sorry. I normally have it more together than this. We need spring break, right? I need spring break.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you. I think we're good now. So if you were on the course page, you'll probably need to refresh so that you can see this, but it's the top of the class page, class materials for 3.1 now. And I will probably need to grant you all access as editors. All right, everyone should be able to open that and work in the document now. And I think I see people hopping in here. So the last step is your breakout groups. Thank you all for bearing with me. If you'll join your groups, and then let's go until probably 2:40, 2:45. I'll check in with you and see where we're at. But I do want us to come together and kind of summarize these, but I want you to have time to work also. Or someone else may be back by then, but yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. Rooms are closing now for people who are not back with us. And then I'm gonna share the slide document, so you'll have talking points if you need them. And then this is on the course page for us to go back and refer to as a reminder of these issues. But if there is a representative from group 1 that wants to quickly share what your issue was, how it relates to what we've been talking about, and then kind of what was your take on it.
Yeah, so our group was working on the bill, the Don't Say Gay bill. We were working on that. And some of our key issues was that the parental rights in education bill wants to like limit the discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity and stuff in the classroom, and that the teachers and officials in the school systems, they'll like, if the bill gets passed, they'll have to tell the parents within a 6-week time frame once they know a student's identity. Like if it like becomes known, they have to tell the parent. And we related it to like coming out and like the fears that are associated with having to come out, whether it be to family, whether it be to peers, whatever it is. And as a group, we agreed that that we kind of just it was kind of, this bill is just kind of weird to us, like why they want it to be passed. We believe that using the school systems to like start declining the talk of the LGBTQ plus community, it would put a lot of pressure on teachers who are already stressed with everything else they have to deal with. And we think that forcing the teachers and the school systems to tell the parents something that the student had confided them with, it would break the trust that teachers and students have. And that would make the environment a lot more stressful for an already stressful environment. So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective on the position that this puts teachers in. Not even to, I don't want to minimize the experience of the child, but this is a really tricky place for teachers to be put because we do have that element of trust and confidentiality that we expect to have in those relationships with children. And so really the only time, that a teacher would break that confidentiality is if the child were in danger, of being hurt or hurting others. That would be a space for that confidence to be broken out of concern, for safety. But with something like this, I think, yes, the issues related to coming out, and then, we normally don't know what a child's home life is like. And so, we do want students to feel supported and safe when they're in schools. So an interesting issue. And then we'll see kind of a similar idea, I guess, in terms of putting teachers in the position to be reporters or whatnot later on, but it's kind of a common theme right now. What about group 2? And you even have the visual.
Yeah, so for our group, we had an article to discuss that a flag, which is resembled on the right, was being compared to the Nazi flag, and stating that it showed the exact amount of hate and that the Nazi flag was trying to portray. And so key issues that we found were that a lot of parents were the first ones to be discussing this point and how it was negative for the school's aspect. And so we wrote that parents' right to control what kids are being taught or exposed to is something that was discussed in the article through the discussions that parents took place with the school board with. And we also wrote that the inclusion doesn't isolate anyone in a way that a Nazi flag would, which is why the issue of trying to compare that to a Nazi flag is really bad, because it's the LGBTQ art expression that is exampled here resembles love and not hate. And the freedom of expression was another key issue, as students weren't able to express their feelings through artwork if it's going to be compared to Nazi, tradition. And then how it resembles anything from the text or the chapter we wrote for the chapter is that the LGBTQ artwork that was in the flag And the comparison to the Nazi flag was a near blatant example of like being towards hate crime, as you're trying to change that perspective that the LGBTQ community is trying to portray as like through love. And the school took that idea and switched it towards hate in ways of like fear mongering and making the public think that it was like some sort of new hate stance, and then have the public fear that kind of expression, which is how it could relate to the hate crimes that the LGBTQ community experiences. And for our group stance, we said that we completely disagreed that the flag should be compared to a Nazi flag, as the flag does resemble love and not hate. And it gives inclusion to communities more than taking that away. And we also agreed that students should have expression through methods of art, regardless of in school or if not, as it opens up to self-expression and doesn't restrict anything that most LGBTQ students may fear when going into school. And so, yeah, that was our stance on this article.
And if I remember correctly from this article, there was a report that this was not sort of this was not an isolated incident. Is that right? That this administrator had?
I believe so. I believe so.
So I think this was sort of like it's a recurring theme of discrimination, if I remember correctly from this school. Thank you for sharing. What about group 3? This is a bit of a different, not so much about discrimination.
So we said that the key issues for one, being a part of the LGBT community is looked down upon in the Christian community. And then you mix that with the African American community, is like it multiplies that by like tenfold, because African Americans have been seen to like held to the same standards as white communities, which were a few years behind, honestly, in society. So I don't know why it is, but I grew up in this like specific community, and I don't know why. I've never known why. It's just like because I don't know. It's something deep rooted, like very deep rooted. There's a lot of like hate and like self-hate, like cultural hate, like deep rooted in the community. So I feel like that plays a role in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it related to the concepts because, well, one, sexual orientation was discussed as an issue with codes. And I feel like that's a problem too, because if you're a part of the LGBT community, also you're Christian and also you're African American, having it posed as an issue, you'll present yourself as the problem. Like you're like identifying yourself as the issue. It's like an issue is something that you need to like fix and repair. So it's like you won't ever accept it if like someone poses it to you as an issue. And it's like I feel like I also wrote that many families identify themselves as African Americans, and they shun those that identify themselves as homosexual. And I grew up in some of first gen, and my parents were both born in Africa, and so I was told like a lot of stories, and they still stone people. Like it's very old school and very like medieval times, but they still stone people and like kill people and like put hits on people that are like African American, especially men. It's a little bit worse for men, which is like in that community, because like men are supposed to be like the breadwinners and like the head of the family in Africa and supposed to provide and also like serve in the military. So like if you're a gay male in Africa, they'll kill you. And women, their opportunities are not as plethorous, if that makes sense. I don't really know how to like describe it. I just grew up like hearing stories about like personal stories about how like this is like real. It's still happening. Like, it's very much real. We don't really get that point of view or like that same sense of like fear in the United States. Like I don't know, like there's a lot of bad things happening in the United States, but we're very much privileged compared to people that are living in third world countries, especially if you're African American and especially if you're a part of the LGBT community. Like they still kill people like it's nothing. They kill people in the streets. And my mom actually showed me an article. Someone was like killed with a machete. Like there's a whole video about someone killed with a machete because they were gay. And there was no one in our group that like didn't think that it's okay. So we had a unified stance on everything.
Yeah. Well, and so some key issues that I hear being discussed, marginalized communities. So when we talk about heterosexism as kind of a marker of our society, we're also very marked by like a Judeo-Christian religious norm, and so when you take those normative ideals, and African American individuals are already a minority, and then LGBTQ already a minority group, it's kind of like a double whammy of marginalization. And then I think the other thing that you spoke to is kind of the deeply rooted, the history of all of this, as it relates to the African experience, and then secrecy around sexuality and things like that. So yes, still happening in other places, but still very much an issue in our American privilege as well. Group 4.
Our key issues in this article was homelessness among the LGBTQ plus community, which is caused by just a lack of housing programs for these individuals. And this directly relates to the topics that we just discussed about homophobia, which is the leading cause for homelessness. It's hard for them to find jobs and living. And this also relates to parenting issues. This is like a stories I hear so often, that parents who are homophobic will kick their children, or even if they're like an adult, out of the house, and that obviously will lead to homelessness. The LGBTQ plus community is like, I think 2 times more likely to be homeless. So the program in the article was about a program in Philadelphia that addresses this issue. And we all agreed that none of us really thought it was controversial. We think that a program that takes steps to provide these people with resources for housing and works towards solving the entire issue as a whole is a positive program that does only good, and we couldn't think of any harm that this could possibly do. It's just housing, I think, is a right. And I'm not sure that there would be a lot of discussion about that. It just didn't seem like a controversial topic. We're trying to provide people with house, like provide them with a place to live. So we all just kind of unanimously agreed on that one.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I guess sort of they're taking steps in the right direction to solve the problem. They're action oriented in this article. And I guess it begs the question, how do we replicate that? How do we sort of help further that mission homelessness is not an outcome that we want to see for any individual in society. As you say, housing is a right. And so I think, awareness of what are the issues that create this type of situation for folks. How do we educate families? How do we help parents who, have that homophobia? How do we help them work through the circumstances to support their child or adult child in, getting established in society after coming out, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, the issues here are more like, how do we be proactive, I think, versus being reactive to.
Yeah, I think I wish there was a program. I've thought about this before, for parents who are struggling accepting their child's sexuality, because we don't really want to get to the point where we're just fixing the problem, after they're already homeless. I would hope that there would be programs that would keep them from getting there, educating parents, and, if they need therapy to go through with this, and therapy with their child. I just think like that would be really a cool thing to explore, so that we could stop this problem from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. Thanks, Madison. Group 5.
So we looked at an article And it was titled "What Many LGBTQ plus students worry about the most during the pandemic." Our key issues were mental health care and medical health or medical care as well for LGBTQ plus, stressors that are starting to come up during the pandemic, in-person learning, as well as like teaching topics, LGBTQ topics in school, and then limiting participation in sports. A lot of what this article had to do with was like returning to school. And it connected back to what we have been talking about with the current laws and current events that are happening and the added stress from the pandemic. One of the main things that we all agreed on is that there should be more accessibility to mental health care and medical care. I think it said, I'm trying to find. Okay, yeah, it says transgender and non-binary youth are more likely to say that they have trouble getting mental health care compared to cisgender, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer peers. Also, there was a survey that asked LGBTQ plus teens and young adults to assess how they felt, and it was like angry, nervous, stressed, scared, sad, excited, or happy about 3 policies: banning transgender girls from playing on girls' sports teams, transgender boys from playing on boys' teams, prohibitions on doctors prescribing gender-affirming medical care to transgender youth, and policies requiring schools to tell parents if their children are using different names or pronouns at school. And a lot of the reports were stress, anger, sadness, and nervousness. We also agreed that there should be more support and education for and about these communities. One of the topics in the articles was how they should be allowed to use whichever bathroom and locker room they are identifying with, but that's becoming a big stressor in school that the teachers as well are divided on. But there should just overall be more support, more education about it.
Yeah. And you brought out from those survey questions, some of the other, related issues that other groups have shared. So we can see that, what's happening in Georgia and Florida, and Pennsylvania or whatever, this is like spanning the nation, and impacting people in the LGBTQ plus community in a variety of ways. And I think, I don't know if your adolescence was like mine, but that's already a very tumultuous point in development. High school is hard. It's hard without these added stressors and pressures. And I think the suicide rate among folks in this community is much greater. Depression rates are much higher. And so I do think, again, being aware that that is the case, and then thinking from the education perspective or the social work perspective, how do we create supports to kind of mitigate some of this, is really where the work needs to be done. Group 6.
So article talked about a same-sex couple in South Korea who wanted to be on the same insurance as spouses, and they denied them and wouldn't recognize them under common law marriage as well because they couldn't legally get married. And so they didn't get any of the benefits that a couple would get when it comes to stuff like that. And so we related it back to when we did talk about common law marriage and palimonium, and if they are, in some states, if it was a heterosexual couple, if they could then be looked at the government as a married couple, then it shouldn't change just because they are a same-sex couple. And we kind of all agreed that that goes straight into like, just if they're together, they shouldn't have any different rights than a heterosexual couple.
Right. And I do want to mention, I know we're running out of time, but someone asked a question about the same-sex common law marriage. And I did some research on that. I found that only in 2 states in the union have they changed the language around common law marriage relationships so that same-sex couples are recognized under that common law idea. So, I know this is coming from South Korea, but I think that information plays in here in terms of what's happening in the US is that I think it was Iowa and Michigan are the 2 states that have changed their verbiage to recognize same-sex common law marriages. But yeah, we see access to benefits being, denied for same-sex couples. All right, group 7, and hopefully we'll have enough time for group 8 as well.
So for our article, it mainly talked about gay men coming out in male-dominated sports. It specifically mentioned how one male came out in the 90s and he got so much backlash from it that he committed suicide later on. And ever since then, it's been like very low numbers that have even like maybe mentioned or alluded to them possibly like coming out or being gay. To relate this back to like text, it's more just like homophobia, especially from like fans specifically. I remembered in the article, it discusses how like through social media, they're trying to like dilute the whole situation down and like make it so that they can come out without a lot of backlash. But one story was that a lot of the fans, like some fans will get like drunk at these games and may like yell out slurs and stuff like that to the players that have come out. So that was an issue with homophobia. And then we all kind of had the same stance. It's more of a like societal issue. And I feel like we all felt that if we're just more educated and aware and exposed to these issues that are happening, it would help out a lot, especially because men in general have so many mental health issues that they don't deal with to begin with. And then on top of maybe coming out and saying that they are gay, it could add to these mental health issues as well.
Yeah, so some societal issues related to gender role ideology that we've talked about. And then I think kind of the thing that we're seeing in this situation is like a microcosm experience taken onto the macro stage. It's one thing if you were just an average Joe coming out in your local community or whatever, but when you amplify that to kind of like the national stage, then the experience is amplified that much more because you're in the public eye. So yes, it's a reflection of a societal problem for sure. Or last group 8, and this is probably the most recent event, I think.
Okay, so for ours, we talked about like the Texas governor calling on citizens to report parents of transgender kids for child abuse. So for the key issues, it's the rights for people wanting to transition, government officials trying to insert themselves into personal choices, and medical health care issues. We kind of came to the conclusion that if people do not, or basically saying if people do not go through the transition they feel necessary, then there could be a bigger mental health issue that come up, and the children cannot be happy. And then our unified stance was that political views should not go into personal choices in a family or individual making this choice.
Sure. And I think the nuances of this, again, there's been this call for teachers, professionals working with children to identify families who are supporting, transgender kids in this way in terms of reporting abuse. So again, that's that piece that we talked about in the first issue of, breaking that partnership between children and professionals, families and professionals. And it's sort of overreach, if you will, as you guys point out, that political views overreaching into personal choices of an individual or family. So And again, all of that just to, I guess, just kind of, awareness is the first step, I think, in acknowledging what are the issues facing people in this community. And then again, for those of us working in social human services fields, how do we do proactive work rather than waiting until we are reacting to a problem? How can we be proactive in supporting and preventing these type of concerns? And with that, I should have your attendance for being on the call from your slides. Thank you for doing that work together as we leave each other for the week. And next week, have a good spring break. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Do not forget your midterm. That's happening on Thursday. And then you're on spring break, right? And I will see you back on whatever day that is after the week off. Okay. Take good care.